So with show of hands, who works at a company that uses a cloud provider? All right, keep your hands raised. Who of you knows how much your company gives to that cloud provider? All right, okay. Kind of, sort of. Okay, awesome, thank you. So today I'm going to focus on cloud providers, reducing costs for, so that maybe the cloud providers won't like me, but hopefully you'll be okay. Hopefully you will. So my focus will be on projects where you actually have some cloud costs. I'm going to use AWS just as an example, nothing like specific to AWS, just for consistency. So let's start with a story. So I'm working on my new feature, and I want to have my own little development environment, and I spin up some cloud resources and hacking away, writing my code, and then I go home for the day, and then the weekend comes, or I take a vacation. Sometimes my company has a summer break or a winter break, and I leave my resources up, and the cloud bill goes high. Multiply that by the number of engineers, and it becomes unsustainable. So one thing we did was we created the reservation system. You're like, well, duh. But yeah, seriously, a reservation system is a pretty easy way to give us a quick win to save on resources. So instead of me as an engineer having access to AWS right away and spin up any resources basically that I want, now I have to go through this reservation system, and I would need to put in some information. And after a while, I basically get these resources for maybe a couple of days, and then they get auto-deleted. So if I accidentally forget to delete those, they will be auto-deleted, and so kind of gives me a cap of how much money we'll be spending. The nice thing about that too, the nice thing about that too is it gives us a way to systematically tag these resources. And so from the back end, you get all kinds of cool reports of, this is how much this project costs, or this is how much this engineer costs, not necessarily for like shaming people, but just knowing like, hey, I'm going to send you these individualized emails to tell you how much you're spending. And it's not, again, it's not something to shame you. But most of the time, finance is the one that's dealing with these numbers. Maybe the folks in the lead dev room know how much we're spending. But us as engineers, we don't really know. A lot of times, that information is hidden from us. So for me to get this individualized email once a week to tell me, hey, this is how much you've spent so far, and that was a lot of money at first. When I first saw that email, I was like, wow, that's my paycheck many, many times, and I just spent that in a week, and maybe I shouldn't be doing that. And so one thing I did was I started to gamify this. I was like, how can I get my job done and still get that email telling me a much smaller number? And so I put that as a goal for myself, and I managed to reduce that by probably 50%, and still got the work done. So that was a cool thing. So other ideas. Using cheaper resources. You don't, as a development environment, and if your company is spending like a shared lab environment, you can use cheaper resources and still get your work done. You don't need to have the same fancy EC2 instances that you're running in production. You can use cheaper ones. So for example, using Spot instances. According to AWS website, using Spot instances can reduce up to 90% of your cloud costs, so that's pretty cool. Another thing is, do you really need the fancy NVMe or SSD storage that you're running in production, or can you use a much cheaper option that is, yeah, it is slower storage, but it still saves a lot of money? The other thing, how much replication do you need in your database in your development environment? Not much. It's not like a production system, so you can save a lot of money that way too. And one of the things, like going back to that reservation system, you can limit the instance types that you're going to provision, and that also puts a cap on the cost of how much you're going to spend on instances. And I just pulled up AWS pricing. I just put random CPU and memory, and these are just as an example. So if you notice, the T4G is pretty similar to M7A, and the only difference, according to this, is the network performance. So again, you're running a lab environment. Do you need that fancy equipment, or can you use a cheaper instance and it's more than 40% cheaper? Another thing, Ainsley mentioned tests. So how good are your tests? Are you just running all kinds of random tests that make all these API calls and your cloud provider keeps charging you? Can some of these tests be run locally without even touching the cloud? Can you simulate different things to also reduce the cost? So moving on to the production environment. So that's a little bit different. So you're a software as a service company. You're pretty successful. Your sales team is doing a great job getting more customers. You're onboarding more customers. Customers are happy. They want more features. They want more products. You're doing that. And you're scaling your infra, which is great. And then, again, your cloud bill keeps going up. So what are things that we did to help curb our cloud bill? So we run Kubernetes, like managed Kubernetes. And we used to be very over-provisioned because we don't want to be on call. And this is also software as a service. So we don't really know how much, we can't really control how much data customers are sending us. And so we used to not have like horizontal pod auto-scaling in Kubernetes enabled. And so that was one thing that we enabled. So as the workload shifts, then Kubernetes would add or remove pods based on the workload. So that lowered our cloud costs quite a bit. I want to say the services that my team owns, we probably saved around 30%. Another thing, are your services really tied to AMD, or can you run on ARM? This is, again, another example where an ARM instance is at least 10% cheaper. And this is just, again, just random instance types. So that's another quick win that you can do. Maybe not quick, depending on your system. Let's see. Batch processing. So maybe when you had a handful of customers and your system was smaller, you weren't as efficient in processing requests. And that's OK. You made a lot of API calls to the cloud provider. But now that's becoming a lot more expensive. So how much of that processing can you batch? So instead of making 10 API calls, you can make a lot fewer. And sometimes you can't avoid it, and you have to re-architect your system, because what got you here won't get you to the next step. And your cloud bill will just eat all your profit. So takeaways. So tag your resources. Then that will also help you whenever you sunset some feature, you know what resources to actually decommission instead of having some random things running in the cloud. And transparency matters. Bring your engineers on the journey. Tell them how much your cloud bill is. They will find very creative ways to reduce that. And again, an effective solution may not be technical. Like just that sending an email to an engineer to say, hey, this is how much you're costing, or like your resources are costing us. It's not really a technical solution. It's more about a process. And with transparency, it helped reduce a cloud bill. And start with the low-hanging fruit. So again, like auto-scaling, using different type of architecture. These are smaller things that you can make that can have big impact on your cloud bill. So maybe you may not need to re-architect your services, and that will be OK. But definitely start with the low-hanging fruit first. And that's it. Thank you.